Masechus Kiddushin Daf Nun Zayin, the Gemara continues discussing the list of things which are asur b'hana, which you cannot use for Kiddushin. The Gemara is deriving the sources that they are asur for hana. So first up we have Egla Arufa. The Gemara says, what is the source that is asur b'hana? The Gemara quotes Rabbi Yanai, who says that Egla Arufa is called a kapara, it's called an atonement, linking it to karbonos, chatas, and other karbonos that are an atonement. And just like all karbonos are asur b'hana, there's an isur me'ila if you use them. The Egla Arufa is also asur b'hana. Next, you have the birds of the Mitzayra, the two tziporim that a Mitzayra has to bring as part of his tahara process to allow him to get back into the machane. And these tziporim are brought outside the azar. They are not karbanos. They are what's called a machshir. They create a situation in which the halacha changes and he's allowed to come into the machane. So what is the source that they are asur b'hana? Somewhere says there's a machshir and a mechaper inside the Beis HaMikdash and a machshir and a mechaper outside the Beis HaMikdash. The machshir and the mechaper inside the Beis HaMikdash is the asham, the carbon asham that a Mitzayra brings. That's the machshir. He needs to bring that to be allowed to come into the machane. And the mechaper is other ashamais. Now those are connected. There is no difference in their halachas, and therefore the machshir is linked to the mechaper inside the Beis HaMikdash. You learn from the mechaper to the machshir, and it has an isur hana in the machshir just like the mechaper. The same thing applies to the machshir and the mechaper outside the Beis HaMikdash, which are the machshir is the two birds of the Mitzayra, and mechaper is the Egla Arufa. Egla Arufa is an atonement, even though it takes place outside the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, you link those two, just like the mechaper has an isur hana, as we've just discussed. The machshir, which is the birds of the Mitzayra, also has an isur hana. The Gemara now asks, when are the birds of the Mitzayra, when do they become asur b'hana? Now, the birds of the Mitzayra, there are two of them. One of them is shechted, the other one is set free. Now, the one that's set free, obviously, from the time that it's set free, there's no longer any isur hana. However, there was an isur hana before it gets set free, and the question is, when does that begin? So, Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan says it's from the time of shechita. The Gemara explains very simply, shechita is what asurs it. It creates it in the state of what it is. And from the time of the shechita, the one that is slaughtered becomes asur b'hana, the one that is not slaughtered becomes asur b'hana, and it gets mutter b'hana when it gets set free. Now, Rish Lakish says it's from the time that it is taken, from the time that it is purchased, from the time that you acquire these two birds to be the birds of the Mitzayra procedure, they become asur b'hana. So, what's the source for that? So, Rish Lakish explains you learn it from Egla Arufa. The entire isur of the birds of the Mitzayra, as we've said, is derived from Egla Arufa. Just like in Egla Arufa, the isur hana begins while it is still alive. The birds of the Mitzayra, the isur hana also begins while it's still alive. You don't have to wait for shechita. Someone says, okay, well, when does the isur hana and the Egla Arufa begin? So Rav Yanai says, I heard that there was a specific moment, but I forgot. And the other Tamid Chachamim said, it's from the time that it goes down to the Nachal Eisen, from when it descends into the gorge, into the valley, where the procedure of the Arufa, where it gets hit on the back of the neck, where that will begin, entering the valleys, that makes it asur. So the Gemara says, so then why are you telling me that the birds of the Mitzayra is from the time of Lekicha, from the time that you take them? You're deriving it from Egla Arufa, but that's not the time by Egla Arufa. By Egla Arufa, it's not later. It's not until after you go into the Nachal. So Gemara says, how could you compare that to the birds of the Mitzayra? There is no going into the Nachal by the birds of the Mitzayra. I learned from Egla Arufa that something happens while it's alive to make it asur b'hana. In the Egla Arufa, there is the moment it goes into the Nachal. You don't have a comparable moment in the Mitzayra birds, and therefore it has to be from the time that you take it. Okay, now the Gemara has some proofs in this machlekes. First, Rabbi Yochanan asks the Kasha and Rish Lakish. We have a source that creates the isur on the birds of the Mitzayra, and that creates the heter on the one that gets set free. So it says, called Sipor Tahar Tahir Techelu. You can eat all tahar birds, so that is to include the one that gets set free. That's where we learn that the one when he gets set free becomes mutter. Now, v'zeh shaloita chelu, extra word there, is to include the one that gets slaughtered has an isur. So the Gemara says, why do you need to tell me, Rav Yochanan is asking, Rish Lakish, why do you need to tell me an isur from the shechita? According to you, it's asur already from before the shechita. It's asur from when the time that you take the bird. So Rish Lakish answers, because you may think that the shechita is matir. The shechita is matir karbanos, to be eaten, even though there were asur hana beforehand. So you may think that it maters this bird of the Mitzayra also. And therefore, you need a ribo, you need a pasuk to tell me that no, there is an isur at that point as well. Next, Kasha Rabbi Yochanan asks, we have a brisa that says that if you slaughtered one of them and it's found to be treif, the Gemara assumes this means that the shechita was improper. So it's found to be treif. So the halacha is that the one that's not slaughtered is still good. You just need to take another one. The one that had shchita that was treif is disqualified. You need to take another one to replace that one. You can use the other one that's still alive, and you take new ones. Now, the one that was slaughtered and it was no good, so it's for sure forbidden to eat because it's nevela. However, the Brisa says it's mutter bahana. So Rav Yochanan says, I understand. If you say that I'm right and the shchita is what makes it asur bahana in the first place, so this one never had a proper shchita, so it's mutter bahana. According to Rish Lakish, that it was already asur bahana from the time that it was taken, and just because the shchita is no good, why should that mean that it becomes mutter bahana now? What was matir bahana exactly? So on that, Rish Lakish answers the heter that we're not referring to here where it became a problem in the shechita. We're referring to where you opened it up and you found that it had an injury, it had a problem in its insides. That existed before it was ever taken, and therefore its original taken is disqualified, and it never became asur bahana. You can't use a treif bird for the Metzaira's birds at all. The Gemara now asks a third kasha. We have another brisa that's clearly discussing a shechita psula. It says if you did the shechita but you didn't have the other materials there, the required Eizav, 8 Eres, or Shni Toilas, the grass, the cedar tree, or the red string. So it is not a proper shechita because the shechita didn't have the mitzvah involved. So Rav Yaakov says in this brisa, since it was already set aside for its mitzvah, it is asur bahana. Rav Shimon says no, since the shechita was performed not like the mitzvah, it's mutter. So the Gemara says obviously it wasn't asur before because the shechita is not going to be matir it, and therefore it's the shechita that would have assured it, and the shechita here is not answering it because it wasn't kimitzvasa. But it's clearly against Rish Lakish, who says that it was already asur bahana from before. So the Gemara answers it's actually a machlekes tanaim, and this is the Tana that holds that it's from then. What's the machlekes tanaim? So the Gemara quotes the brisa from Dibei Rabbi Shmuel, which we brought before, that learns the isser from eglar rufa. As we said, there's a machshir and mechaper inside, there's a machshir and mechaper outside. Just like machshir and mechaper inside, the Yasham Mitzayra and the regular Yasham are linked. Machshir and mechaper outside, the birds of the Mitzayra and the Eglar Rufa are linked as well. So therefore, it's learned from Eglar Rufa according to this opinion, and it becomes asur already mechayim. The other ones learned from the psukim you mentioned before, and they therefore hold it as the shechita that asurs. The Gemara now moves to analyze those psukim more specifically. We had said before that from kol tzipor tar techilu led us to include the one that is sent away, that is mutter. V'zash lo yisechilu is to include the one that is slaughtered, that is asur. So the Gemara says, how do you know that that's how it should be? Maybe it should be the opposite. Maybe the one sent away is asur, but no, the one that you slaughtered is mutter. So Rav Yochanan answers, the Gemara tries a few answers here. Rav Yochanan says, first name Rav Shimon ben Yechai, because living creatures you never find that they are asur, and therefore the one which is mutter has to be the living one. So Shmuel Bar Yitzchak says that's not true. There are some which we find. Which ones do we find? Where do we find living creatures that are asur? So the Gemara first brings a nevad and a muktzah. Nevad is an animal that was worshipped as an avodah zarah. Muktzah is an animal that was set aside to be sacrificed to an avodah zarah. They are asur. So when it says no, they're asur to bring as a carbon, but they're not asur bahana. You can use them for mundane reasons. So the Gemara says, okay, I'll ask you another kasha. Rabbi Yirmiyah says there's a roiva and a nirva that had witnesses, an animal that was used for bestiality with witnesses that saw that, so then it becomes asur bahana. So the Gemara accepts that, and the Gemara gives a slightly modified answer. Rav Yochanan says, the majority of animals that are alive are not asur, and therefore we assume that the one which is going to be permitted is the living one. The Gemara brings a second answer for how we know that the mutter one is the living one. It's from the Dibei Rabbi Shmuel, who says that there is a drasha from the fact that it says V'shilach al pnei hasad, send it out on the surface of the field. It should be like a field, just like a field is mutter. You never find a field that's asur bahana. This bird should also be mutter bahana. Samar says there's a different drasha you need from the word sadeh, and that is that you're supposed to stand inside the city and send it over the wall to a field, not to a yam and not to a midbar. We have a brisa that says you shouldn't stand in Yafa and throw it over the wall to the sea. You shouldn't stand in Geves and throw it over the wall into the midbar. You should stand in the city, meaning Yerushalayim, and send it over the wall into the field. So the Gemara says that can be derived from the extra hay. It says hasada. You have sada and hasada. One is to teach you it should be mutter bahana, and the other is to teach you that you should send it from the city over into a field. So the Gemara gives now has a third answer for how we know that the mutter one is the one that is sent away. The Torah says, Rava, the Torah would not send an animal out, which is asur bahana, which can be a problem, because people aren't going to know it's asur bahana. It gets mingled into the rest of the birds in the world, and it may end up being used. Okay, the Gemara moves on to other items on the list which are asur b'hana. Next is the hair that's cut off of a nazir. So the Gemara says, how do you know that's asur b'hana? So the Gemara says, because the pasuk calls it kadosh or kodesh, it's spelled without a vav, and that's one of the 13 Maseres where it's spelled without a vav. And we read it as kodesh, which means that it has kedusha. It should be like hektish, and it's asur b'hana. So the Gemara says maybe then it should be exchangeable. You should be able to redeem it like hektish. The Gemara says no. That's why we have the kriya of kadosh, which is a shame just to say that it has kedusha, not kodesh, and that counteracts that. Next, the Gemara refers to the Peter Chamor, the firstborn of the donkey, where it has an arifa, if it's not redeemed. And the Gemara says, what is the source of the asur b'hana? The Gemara doesn't bring the source, but the Gemara brings that it is a machlokes Tanaim, where Rabbi Yehuda says that it's asur b'hana, and Rabbi Shimon says that it's mutar b'hana. So should we say then that our Mishnah is going only like Rabbi Yehuda? So on that, the Gemara says that Rav Nachman says in Rabbi Baravua, after the arifa, everyone agrees. Machlokes is only before the arifa, so our Mishnah is talking after the arifa and fits with everyone. Moving on, the Gemara discusses basar b'chalav. Where is the source for that? The Gemara quotes Tani D'Bei Rabbi Shmuel. It says, "Le'savashal gedi b'chalevi mai." Do not cook a goat in smothered milk 3 times. It says that in the Torah, one is to teach that there's an isser achila, one to teach that there's an isser hana, and one to teach that it's also to cook even if you don't do anything with it. And then the Gemara points out that this Mishnah does not fit with the Tana of Rav Shimon ben Yehuda, who says that it is permitted to get hana from a basar b'chalav, because it says ki am kadosh ata l'shem lekecha le'zavash gedi b'chalev yamai, referring to basar b'chalav as am kadosh ata l'shem lekecha, and the similar expression is used about nevel and trefa. It says anshe kadosh tiyinli, and there it says specifically lekelef tashlichanai, so you are allowed to get hana from it. Linking the two, just like there you can get hana, basar b'chalav you can also get hana. Next, we had chulin, which is shechted in the azara, a non-carbon, non-hektish animal which is slaughtered inside the azara. So what's the source of that asur b'hana? Samara quotes a limud of Yechlan says in the name of Rabbi Meir. It says in the Torah, shecht, mine in mine and yours in yours, a carbon in the azara. That's learned from the fact that it says v'shachad. It says v'shachad as ben habakar, and it continues to describe the shechita only there, and you should shecht chulin only outside the azar, like this. And it ends off b'sharecha. So you should not do yours in mine and mine is yours. You should not do karbonis outside the azara, and that it says specifically is in that we know that is an isser now because it was the isser of hektish never comes off because it was never shechted properly. So linking to that is if you shecht yours in mine, that's if you shecht chulin in the azara, that also has that isser hana which continues on it. Now you may think that there's an isser karis as well, just like there's an isser karis on shchutei chutz, there should be an isser karis on chulin in the azara. So for that it says, well, Pesach hayomay lo heviya lahakav karban Hashem v'nichras. Only for that specific thing of shchutei chutz, where you shach the carbon outside, that's where it says v'nichras, that there is a kares, but not in the chulin and the azara where there is no iser kares. So the Gemara therefore asks, so then how could you learn from shchutei chutz to chulin b'azara? Shchutei chutz is kares, chulin b'azara is not. How could you learn that the iser hana applies from one to the other? So the Gemara therefore brings a whole nother drasha. Abaye brings a lengthy drasha from the fact that it says v'shachtu 3 times. It says a word like v'shachtu in the parsha of Shlamim. It says v'shachtu, v'shachat oisai, and the 3rd time it says v'shachat oisai. So these 3, what are they for? So the Gemara says this is to teach me about 3 halachos, about chulin, that where you're allowed to eat it. Now in the midbar they were not allowed to eat chulin. They were not allowed to shecht a tam animal, an animal without a mum, and eat it. The only meat they were allowed to eat was meat of a korban shlamim. When they got to Eretz Yisrael, that rule was taken off. And the Torah specifically says when you get to Eretz Yisrael, basar taiv will be permitted. Now, that is only though ki yirchak mimcha hamakam, when you'll be far away, and then it will not be convenient to come to the Beis Hamikdash and shech the korban shlamim every time you want to eat meat. But it's only in richuk makam, it's only when you're far away. To take your chulin and shech it inside the azara, that you're not allowed to do. Now, that is only something which is tam, which is not a balmum, which could be brought on the mizbeach. There you have an iser to shecht it as a chulin in the azara. How do you know that it applies even to a bal mum? So that's because it is the same min as those which are kosher. So that's one riboy, to include balmum, which is a min that could go on the mizbeach. And then you also want to include a chaya, which is an animal which is kosher, but it can never go on the mizbeach, one step further. And you even want to include an oif, a bird, which doesn't even have shechita in the Beis Hamikdash, it has malika. So where do you see these three dumudim? So that's v'shachtu, v'shachadai, these three things. Now, that's as far as chulin ba'azara. How do you know that that not only is it forbidden to shech, but it's also forbidden to eat once you shechted? So that's because it says, there you could shecht and eat, but this you cannot eat as well. And the Gemara goes through the same cheshbon of including the balmum, the chaya, and the oif. Now, how do you know, one final thing, how do you know that there is an iser hana? Maybe you can feed it to the dogs. So that's because by other things it says, like to exclude that these you don't have the ability to feed it to the dogs.